This clip is brought to you by SaveWithConrad.com.
Something else with some pretty notable names is going to happen here. Meltzer would write, in a surprise move, the WWF has hired Roddy Piper to take the spot vacated by Jesse Ventura as color commentator on its Superstars of Wrestling show. Piper may be starting at the TV tapings this weekend, although I've also heard he may not start until the following Superstars of Wrestling taping on the 28th in Hershey, PA. Piper won't be playing a heel role, but will instead play a babyface role and work with Vince McMahon. The split between McMahon and Ventura was because Ventura was offered a deal with a company called DreamWorks that is producing a wrestling video game for Sega Genesis. Even though McMahon had claimed that this would be competition for a WWF licensed video game by Acclaim for Nintendo, someone familiar with the industry said that the two games are in no way competition for one another. In fact, McMahon's WrestleMania game is more than 1 year old, and in that business, that means it has very little shelf life remaining. A lot to unpack here. Let's talk about Roddy Piper first. Was Roddy looking to do something in a way to come back and just not be taking bumps and making towns? Or is this something you have to go try to sell?
Roddy was looking to come back in general. And I don't know that Vince necessarily was looking for Roddy to come back on a full-time basis in the ring. I went back to looking for color commentators, and in 1981, maybe 80, 81, when Roddy Piper had gone into Georgia Championship Wrestling, was introduced as Rod Piper, the color commentator for Gordon Soley. Roddy did color commentary pretty much as straight as you could do it. Was very entertaining, not over the top at all, and then started very slowly interjecting comments about Bob Armstrong and so on and so forth, and became this character. Aside from just being a wrestler, he was introduced as a color guy, not a wrestler, and you had to pay to see Rod Piper in the ring. You had to pay to see him in live events. And the idea was, I thought Roddy was a very good color commentator and could replace Jesse, and we wouldn't miss a beat. So we kind of went after Roddy a little bit on that one to say, would you be interested?
It's fascinating, this relationship with Ventura and McMahon. Just so we're clear, make sure everybody has the right timeline here. This is before Jesse is going to sue for royalties. This is a totally separate issue. I think a lot of our listeners sometimes confuse the two. What do you remember hearing about this Sega Genesis business and the fallout with Vince and Jesse?
It was really nothing more than a contract dispute, and Jesse wanted to do his own thing and Vince wanting to do his own thing. So they couldn't agree to do that and didn't necessarily want to work together on it. Got to move on.
You know, what's crazy is the game never gets released. I mean, there were lots of flyers in the video game articles and they had different cover arts and things like that. But this is a Japanese exclusive game that now they're going to rebrand for, you know, the American market. And, the Fire Pro Wrestling series wound up being released by Sega eventually. But the original game was Thunder Pro Wrestling over in Japan, and they're going to sort of Americanize it and call it Jesse the Body Ventura's Wrestling Superstars. And then it never gets released. Eventually, something leaks online, but it feels like he winds up leaving really for nothing because the game never even freaking comes out.
Shit happens.
Meltzer would continue. In addition, the amount of money that game, even if new, and if it was competition for the Ventura game, was negligible in comparison to Ventura's value to the company. In reality, this split up appears to be more stubbornness than business, probably on the part of both. It's simply McMahon told Jesse he couldn't do something, and Ventura was in a position where he didn't want to be told what he could or couldn't do by McMahon. After putting his foot down, even though Ventura wasn't, what he was doing wasn't competition, McMahon couldn't appear to back down, and instead, this somewhat minor situation turned into a contract impasse since Ventura wasn't about to back down. I mean, that sort of hits the nail on the head, does it not? I mean, you have two headstrong guys, and Vince didn't want to set a bad precedent. And that's probably something Vince had to think a lot about back in the days. You know, the idea of, oh, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile type thing.
Give me that word one more time. Into a contract what?
Impasse.
Okay. I don't think that's what you said.
I'm just making sure you're awake, Bubba. Are you going to talk to me about Ventura and McMahon's stubbornness, or are we going to worry about the way the hillbilly pronounces words?
I like worrying about the way hillbilly pronounces words. Well, I think that the old impasse.
Thank you.
It just came down to a difference of opinion, and it really came down to Jesse digging in and feeling that he should be able to do whatever he wanted, even though he was under contract to WWE. And that's not the way that it goes. So Jesse dug in, Vince dug in, and Jesse had an opportunity here. Okay, you want to go quit. And I don't know that, at that time, I know that Jesse kind of was having a little buyer's remorse there for a long time, but that was his choice, and that's what he wanted to do. He felt very strongly about it and moved on.
What do you mean he was having buyer's remorse? Talk to me about that.
I don't think that first of all, what Jesse was promised was going to happen. And, a lot of times people will, you and I have been through it before and with some different talents and different people where, oh man, I hear that I can make X amount doing this on my own, or I can make all this money if I was just over here and allowed to do that. And then they get out there and they realize, well, either I have to work for that money or it's not really true. And in this situation, that's what Jesse found out. That, hey, maybe I should have stuck around a little bit longer. And now I'm looking for something else, because his video game world and all the promises that had been made by his people just weren't panning out exactly the way that he was promised at the time, or that he thought they should have.
When Vince starts to have an issue with somebody, a talent back in this era, you're sort of in the inner circle. Does he ever say, Bruce, reach out to so-and-so and see if you can talk some sense into him? Is that ever something he asks for your help with, or not so much?
Not so much during this time frame. And especially, with Jesse, Jesse was Jesse, and Jesse had an agent that we dealt with. So it made it difficult. Anytime that you have that situation, it just becomes a little difficult when the talent is removed from the actual negotiation process.
It's hard to imagine that he's done here in August of 90. He winds up suing in November of 91 for the royalties. So he's on the sidelines of wrestling for well over a year. He's filling some time doing some radio calls for the NFL. I don't think he's doing much else, at least in entertainment, certainly not in the wrestling space. Do you think if this stubbornness about this video game thing, if this had went differently, do you think he still would have wound up suing?
That's hard to know. I don't know if it just was that all of a sudden Jesse was on the outside looking in, and things didn't necessarily pan out. So it's, well, shit, I've already lost this amount of money. Is there any way to go back and recoup? And I think that did have a lot to do with it.
What's interesting to me is it's, of all the people, if Ventura is going to be stubborn and wander off, of all the people to think, let's replace that with a more reliable guy, somebody we know we can count on, who we've always had great relations with. I know what to do. Let's call Roddy Piper. It feels like Roddy and Jesse were cut from the same cloth. Like, these are two old school, we're for the boys, screw the office personalities. It feels like they have a lot in common and could have both been, I don't know, a thorn in Vince's ass occasionally.
They did have some things in common, but they couldn't have been more different in a lot of respects. So, while on the outside, I think someone that, didn't have to work with them could say, they're very much alike, but they were very different when it came to dealing with them. Very, very, very different. I could deal with Roddy one-on-one, and that was never an issue.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.